Hello, my name is Robert Brem, and this is one in a continuing series of mini lectures that are designed to help us in our learning journey together. Today's topic is going to be praxis. Praxis is one of my favorite words. It has sort of a, well, hell, it reminds me of Star Trek. But at any rate, praxis is really a concept that's important to all studies, to all life, as we shall see. All ideas in social life, as a person, a worker, or a citizen, and in society, about how things ought to be done and how we think they can be done, they must at some point be put into practice to make things work, or not. And that is the thing we're really going to be focusing on, is making things work as opposed to not. It all has to do with how well you think about the things you think about in advance before you try to make your plans real. This is what we call implementation, or engagement. Engagement with reality, engagement with other people. This is the manner in which we engage or function. The manner in which we do these things results in the nature of one's life, or family, one's group, or organization, or how the social structures in society together lead to the emergence of the social order. In what we try to create through implementing plans, we get the kind of life or society for which we measure, for which we reward, and we get what we actually do, as opposed to what we say we want to do. This actually raises the issue of validity and reliability in assuring that what you do is in fact what you say you want to do. Okay, so action philosophy. Action philosophy is living what you say you intend to live or enact. That is, in your life, you actually enact what you say you intend. And it's also being willing to live with the consequences of what you say you believe in. For example, the concept of democracy is a set of values much more than merely how you decide, for example, voting. If you say, I believe in democracy, then it is democracy itself, its values, its tenets, its principles, that will embody your code of ethics, your code of morality, and thereby it will guide your actions in the world. If you say, I believe in democracy, if I believe in something, for example, anything, but your actions do not match these, then we look to your actions to see what it is you really think you value, what you really believe, because that's what you put your life's force on the line for. And if you're not matching the values you say you believe in, then your actions tell us a different story. If the people in a country vote for people to elected office who do not enact democracy, then the people who are voting either do not understand what democracy is themselves, or they themselves don't in fact actually believe in democracy. If the people that we elect to office, or who are working in government, like in the public administration, do not live the rules of democracy, then democracy in a society is in grave danger. And so that's the important issue that we're trying to discover here in looking at something called praxis. So when we are answering the question, what shall be done? We are declaring what to do, what we believe should be done. We're deciding, we're making a decision to make policy. And when we make policy, policy is what makes things happen. And we utilize political theory as a guide. For example, the political theory of the principles of democracy would guide action in society. The principles of a healthy life might guide how you live your life. This is called praxis, the merging of theory and practice to create the future. There are three kinds of future then. There's possible futures, there's probable futures, and there's preferable futures. If you know what kind of future you prefer, then you can make a more effective plan to make your preferred future more probable than merely possible. And that is the goal of everything we're doing in our work together. Studying political theory and philosophy is about asking, which kind of future do we want to live in? What will it take to make that future more probable than merely possible? And what is the most effective manner in which to make all of this so? So, we need to understand what a futures consciousness praxis cycle looks like. And it is this which guides our efforts in learning together. And it is this that will then guide our practice, or in this case, praxis. And that is a model that I want to build for you in our other room, where we have a board that I can use. I'm going to show you now what that looks like and how that is constructed. So come with me. So here we are. Let me show you how the praxis model is actually built in real time. I can show you, and I will show you, a finished version of the model and explain it, review what we're talking about here. But I think that it's actually useful for you to see a model being built so that you can think about model construction. In fact, it all does begin with the idea of construction. Then there's deconstruction, and then there's reconstruction, which we'll get into. So pay attention to how the model is actually built, because you actually live your life this way, and any actions you do in your life will also be lived this way as well. So anything you do in life always begins with philosophy. Okay? Philosophy has to do with how ought we do things. What is your definition of the good life? And your definition of the good life guides your actions. And with that, you decide whether your life is working or not, which is when a therapist usually asks you how that's working for you, which we'll be getting to in a minute. We also look at the idea of the good society. We have to have a concept of what a good society looks like in order for us to look at society and ask, is the society actually, well, good? So philosophy guides theory. Theory is how we operationalize conceptually philosophy. If philosophy has to deal with how ought things be, theory has more to do with this is how it might work. We have a theory of how it would work, or how it works in theory. So you have to turn your ideas of what things ought to be like into an idea of, if we were to make that so, what might it look like? And that's a theory. But theory is way too abstract. It really isn't too useful to you until you actually think about the things you think about, and you really should think about the things you think about before you do anything. And this leads to planning. It's better in life to make plans. Plan your work, work your plan. If you don't plan, you plan to fail. That sort of thing. Planning is where you actually operationalize the theory, which operationalizes the philosophy. And this is where you might come up with individual items like that. And all of those would come under the heading of what we might call construction. We construct the philosophy, we construct the theory, and we construct the plan. And the plan is all the little things that you have to do to make your entire grand idea about what you're going to do actually happen. But that's not enough, is it? Then you've got to actually do something. You have to actually take your plan, and you have to engage in implementation. Implementation is where you actually do it. This is also what we might call action. And in action research, or action thinking, or action philosophy, you get the consequences of what you do. The consequences, of course, is when we look at what you did, what happened, as opposed to what you planned to happen, which is why planning, implementation, you actually take action in the real world. This, trying to change out my colors here to get a little bit of creativity, this will always have consequences. Consequences is what actually happened. This is actuality. What actually happened? And this is when you get to ask the question, did it work or not? Or how's that working for you? So at this point, what we're dealing with is, trying to remember what colors I used previously, this is what we call deconstruction, that we take it apart, or what some people might call policy analysis. Or this is you asking for feedback, like what just happened, and then listening to the answers. If you don't listen to the answers of what just happened, then feedback is useless. So what we have now is the whole notion of feedback. Feedback is what you might pick up in data, information, all the ways in which it worked or did not work. It's feedback. And what you do with the feedback is you ask yourself, well, what now? And that's where we come into the notion of revision. Revision could also be called reconstruction. Reconstruction, of course, is the idea, did our plans work or not? In consequence. The feedback gives you the information. Did it work? If it did work, how well did it work? If it didn't work, what didn't work? Or how badly did it work? And then you take that information and you engage in a revision of philosophy. Was our philosophy wrong? Was our definition of good in error? Was our theory not really as good as it should have been, functional? Was our planning in error? Do we need to revise that? And then we do it all over again. And what we end up with here, of course, now is what we call praxis. This is the praxis cycle. Oops. Okay. And so what you end up with is, we live life this way, by the way. The praxis cycle is this whole notion of, in your life you have some definition of good. You come up with a theory of how your life is probably going to look like. You plan your life. I'm going to get a degree, I'm going to get a job. You implement your life. 10 years from now we come back and say, this is what happened. What happened? Maybe I need to start all over again. Instead of maybe being an engineer, you now want to revise your philosophy of the good life and become a poet or something like that. And so this is the praxis cycle. And this works at the micro level for you as a person, guiding your good life. At the macro level as a worker, guiding the good way of working in an organization. And it works at the grand narrative level of analysis in society. What is the good society? What is the political theory that guides it? What kind of public administration planning are we going to put in place and implement? And policy analysis to engage in feedback to revise the whole thing. You can live your life this way. So now, let me show you what this would look like in a nicely refined model. And again, I want to remind you that you got to watch me construct this model. Now let's go ahead and look at it like it might look in a textbook. And so from here, look at this image here. So here is the model that you might see in the book. In fact, it is in the textbooks, my book for the class, all my classes. At the top, you'll see that we have this notion of to enable a competent, informed, discipline-informed inquiry, teaching, and practice. We apply some public administration consciousness, which is my idea that public administrators are always asking, what would this look like if we actually tried to make this happen? And many times you find out that it'll all fall apart when you try to make plans. And this is the idea of futures consciousness guiding praxis. So at the top, you see the notion of construction, or the thesis. We facilitate a constructivist philosophy as to what our definition of the good life is, as to the social contract, the good society. And this helps one, as we move over to the right side of the image, formulate a preferred futures-oriented theory, focusing on making a preferred future more probable than merely possible, which guides integrated planning and action plan from a multidisciplinary perspective, involving civic engagement. You should actually ask other people what their opinions are. Once you've got that, this all informs implementation or practice, and you give deference to expertise. You should always ask people who actually know how to do something, how we should do it. For instance, if you need science, science would be a good thing to use here. And this would all be guided by process evaluation. You evaluate how you're doing things, as well as the outcomes, what actually happened. And this is what we call deconstruction, or the antithesis. The antithesis comes into tension with the thesis, and in the meeting of the two, construction and deconstruction, you end up with this idea of consequences and feedback, which you utilize the information you get from the feedback, and that's over on the left-hand side of the chart you can see. And this is reconstruction or synthesis. The construction, which is your thesis, is engaged with the deconstruction, which is your antithesis, and the two of them together lead to a reconstruction, which is a synthesis, which leads to the idea of what a new philosophy might be, which again you see at the top of the scale. And round you go on the praxis cycle, whether it's your life, whether it's at work, and how you run an organization, whether it's in your town, your community, your state, your nation, and at the grand level of analysis, civilization itself, is always this issue of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, construction, deconstruction, and reconstruction. And this is the formal model that we just constructed a few moments ago on the board. So now what I'd like to do is move on and talk about effectiveness. This model then that I've just shown you is how we live life and how we make our preferred future more probable than merely possible. In the end, we need to think about the things we think about, engaging in policy analysis as a central task of making a society work, or making your life work, is what I'm doing actually working. We make it work by having our actions guided by the standards of an overarching philosophy, a guiding theory, which then guides practice. Thus, praxis. Praxis, of course, is absolutely driven by another concept called effectiveness. Effectiveness in what we do determines if what we do results in good policy or a good life, and thereby in a better life, a better organization, or a better society. Effectiveness is doing the right thing, what really works, which affects the outcomes of what we do in a manner that we intend it to. All worldviews posit effectiveness as a goal of action, or a policy. Using the idea of futures consciousness then, all effective or good social policies are those which enhance the probability versus the mere possibility of leading towards a good society or a good life, a good outcome, as defined by our view of a preferred future, social contract, or just life. In this, Francis Moore Lepay used to argue, each moment of our lives is a vote for the future in which we will live. The question of being effective, then, is always entailing the question of effective at what? For example, what do we need to do to be more effective at bringing about a more democratic future? Or what do we do to be effective at having a healthy family life or work life? And what do we need to do to be more effective at living in the world as a person, a worker, and a citizen in a very shifting, complex world, learning how to navigate the rapids of change? So when you really think about the things you think about, it all comes back down to effectiveness. Effectiveness has three facets which must be in balance over time: efficiency, sufficiency, and equity. Efficiency is doing that which you are doing in the right way, a cost-effective or most economical way. This is the classical liberal standard of effectiveness. The focal point here is here and now, in the present, And what is the lowest cost to achieve the highest benefit? Sufficiency. Sufficiency is doing enough of the right thing, right enough, such that we can make it suffice, and with this we can be satisfied. This is the classical conservative standard of effectiveness, and it is the focal point continually on the past, as in the foundations of action are in the present, built upon what has been in the past. And incrementally we build up from where we have been to where we are to achieve sufficiency in our desired or preferred future goal. Equity then is doing the right thing in the right place, in the right way, for the people who really need socially just outcomes. This is the classical radical standard of effectiveness. And the focal point here is upon building a better future. Action now should lead to the desired or preferred future goal. Always recalling that we get that for which we measure, for what we reward, and what we actually do, as opposed to what we intended to do but didn't quite get to right. By doing all of these things, we create legitimacy in society. Legitimacy of a good society, or a polity, as it's called in Greek philosophy, is determined by the degree to which people continue their grant of, or they withdraw their grant of, authority to the people in the power structures of society. As a result of this, the people are indicating their degree of experience or belief that the social contract, or the governance of society in the private sector, the marketplace, the public sector, the government, or even in their culture, their social sector, is actually enabling them to meet their survival needs more often than not. And so in the end, if society is legitimate, it's been driven by praxis, the praxis of life and politics and culture. And it is this that we have tried to explore over the past few minutes of this discussion we've been having together. I hope that that was helpful for you, because praxis will guide all of our learning together. And as you'll see, as you think about the things you think about applying praxis, it's pretty much the way you also live your life. So in future discussions, we'll be discussing other principles, and every one of them will be built upon praxis. So for now, my name is Robert Brem. Good day and good luck.